Welcome to another episode of the Straight Up Chicago Investor Podcast. I'm 𝗤𝘃𝗀𝗀, licensed agent with Second City Real Estate. With me, as always, is Mark Ainley, founder and owner of 𝗤𝘃𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀. Mark, it's getting a little chilly out there.
Yes, it is. But first, smash that like button. Bam! But also, in all seriousness, please keep referring us. Please keep giving us reviews and definitely subscribe to YouTube. Those things help other people see us when you are subscribing, and then it also goes in your feed and your network sees it and so forth. So make sure you smash that like button and make sure you're leaving us reviews and sharing with your friends. But yeah,
hey, also we want to hear your stories too. I mean, once in a while, someone will come up and say, "Hey, we bought this because of what you saw," or "I was able to appeal my taxes." Like, we love that stuff. Let us know let us know that what we're doing is worthwhile here.
Yeah, we had a couple success stories last week. One was the appealing that someone reached out and said that they saved it was like $14,000 on their tax appeal. So I mean, that was huge, and they used our preferred tax person. So that's awesome.
Yeah, good stuff here. So Mark, I know we were bantering. I'm going to kind of steal your housing provider tip of the week, but at Drexel we bought a 10-unit building. This is about 2 weeks ago from the recording, and I'm going over there, getting keys straightened out, introduce myself to tenants, etc. Sprinkler system goes on me, just like a cartoon. Like, just get absolutely soaked. I went there early, which was funny, but then it immediately got my head to, all right, I don't know how to turn this thing off. We got to do that, get these drained because it's getting chilly out there. So it was cartoonish, but it was also, I'm glad that I was there and it happened because now we can take care of it. But that leads into our housing provider tip here.
Well, was it a true sprinkler system?
Yeah.
Like you have to get it drained and all that stuff. Or you had to get it drained in order to get it back into operation correctly.
It's after this recording. That's where I'm going. I finally got it set up, but it gets, you have the water shut off, and which I could figure that part out, but you have to get it drained. And I want to watch them do it. So make sure I know how to do it.
Well, our guest today will talk more about commercial, and for us, the sprinklers on the commercial side, like, trust me, I've learned my lesson. Don't mess around. Don't second guess the temperature against it. I mean, we've had a couple of buildings like almost like you can swim level so deep because big industrial building where it filled up with 2-3 feet of water because the sprinkler, and those sprinkler, if you bust at the main, like, it's not just a drip. I mean, it's literally it's usually the village telling you something's wrong because so many thousands of gallons have pumped into your building at one time. So sprinklers, that's something not to mess with. But along those lines, something a little more relevant to our listeners today, housing provider tip of the week is, it's this time of year, and by the time you listen to this, you should be definitely doing it. But your water spigot outside, there's two things. The water spigots you got, I think I've left as a tip here. You have the freeze prevention ones that you can put on there. But if you don't have them on there, make sure that you have them turned off. Most of these spigots that you have in your backside of your building or side of your building have a shutoff valve inside of your building that you can shut off manually inside. So make sure, and it ends up being one of those things that you get a small leak between right around the wall, or maybe a couple feet inside your building. The pipe, the copper pipe or galvanized pipe, will get a leak, and will it might go hours without anyone realizing where it's even coming from. So especially if it'll be even longer if you don't have a finished lower level and no one's going down there. But yeah, it can cause a lot of damage. So make sure that your spigots are winterized or turned off or capped, or heck, I know a lot of landlords on the south side that just take them off altogether. It's just so people aren't running car wash.
Be done with it.
So we've done that ourselves. Just we've caught a couple buildings that run car washes off the alley, and we pay the water. So we've just turned them. We've turned them off altogether.
That's awesome. All right, we got a cool show today. Mark, you know a little bit about this topic. I'm relatively green, but for most of our listeners, we're usually talking about buying 3-unit buildings, 12-unit buildings, single family, whatever it may be. But we're going to talk a little bit more today about office, mixed use, industrial. A lot of call it, in my head, I call it niche, but it's a huge part of the Chicago market, and we haven't done a good job hitting on it. So today, first off, I guess before getting into it, another shout out to Sabrina Wattring for another great referral. Anyone looking for a publicist, reach out to Sabrina. We'll link to her in the show notes. But she brought us today's guest, and today's guest is the CEO and managing partner at Greenstone Partners. They're Chicago-based commercial brokerage. They're known for retail, mixed use, office, flex, and industrial transactions. He brings over 2 decades of experience to the table. He's also the managing broker over at Greenstone Partners, an active advisor with a career transaction value of more than $800 million. Big number. Without further ado, Danny Spitz, welcome to the show. Danny.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, we are excited to have you. So you've been doing this for 2 decades. So you lived through a recession. Like you can walk the walk here. Before getting into that and our bunch of questions we have, just talk to us. How did you get started? It sounds like you started analyzing and underwriting deals for a company, and that's what got you in the game. Take us there and we'll go.
Absolutely. So I graduated from Arizona State University with a finance degree, and my first job out of college was at 𝗬𝘃𝗲𝗵𝗁. If you guys recall, they were actually bought by Fifth Third recently, but they were around a long time. And I was underwriting commercial transactions for a couple of years. And after that, I realized that wasn't my life, wasn't for me, banking, and I wanted to get into real estate.
You came back to Chicago after ASU? Let's talk through that for a second.
It's a funny discussion all the time, but what's interesting about that is that everyone laughed when I said those same words. But there really wasn't a market out there for what I wanted to do in the finance world. The Phoenix market was not really mature the way it is today. So I wanted to come back to a city where I'm from and I know it all. And this is the life I wanted to live. All
right. So you said you started underwriting. What did you jump into first then as an investor? So as an investor,
before I became an investor, actually, I got into brokerage by circumstance. I wanted to get into real estate, didn't know where to land. I met a broker, developer, investor from Lincoln Park area, and he took me effectively like a one-on-one mentorship. I started working for him, got my real estate license immediately. And it's funny, within 2 years, I actually bought my first investment property when I was 25. It was a 3-flat in Bridgeport. So I'm sure all of you can relate to that. And then after that, I owned that for 9 years. In between, I owned some other commercial properties in between. But I learned from that experience that I never wanted to own a apartment building by myself again, which led me into more of my commercial investments, which is basically all of them today.
Well, talk to us about that real fast. Bridgeport, what year did you buy? What year would you pay roughly, and what did you sell for? Roughly?
Yeah, so we bought a 3-flat on 34th and Halstead, or on 34th Street, and we paid right around. Of course, back then in 2005, you got to pay list price, right? Or otherwise, you're not going to get it. And we paid about $400,000 for it. And good news, bad news. Good news was that it came with great tenants, had limited turnover, but as you realize over the time, you got to pay attention to things, repairs, water issues. You had a tenant in the lower level call us in the middle of the night with water coming through the ceiling. Here's a new one. I don't know if you heard this one before. Somehow we got a gardener stake up in the sink of the second floor apartment one time. I got that phone call. Not sure how it got up there. So I had to remediate with some weird reptile exterminating company. Learned that where they live and why they're around their property, stuff like that. It just became more of a headache, right? And learning, how to profile tenants before you sign leases and make sure you don't take cash. Learn to sign leases and take checks. So all the little life lessons. Being a 25-year-old, it was a life learning experience. And the way I look at it, we lost some money at the end of the day, but I count it as a tuition towards education on how to manage a property or an apartment building.
Well, I have had the snake issue.
Okay.
There's a pocket, and it's gotten better because the city developed it, but down in Deering, off of Van Vlissingen, if you're back up to the old rail station there, it's a big issue in the crawl space. Like literally, we had two funny scenarios there. It was not funny. It's like amazing. Like we went down the crawl space. It was like Indiana Jones of garter snakes. It was bad. And then two, that same property, when they mowed the lawn, you literally see the snakes like shooting up and shooting around. Like there's so many snakes in the yard, but the city actually recently redeveloped the property into like Prairie Path and Park and stuff like that. So
we were in alleys and streets. We don't know what they were doing, but we ended up learning that it's the bushes and the trees. So we had one of our tenants, we paid him some money and he removed on his own account all the trees in our backyard and bushes for us. And we got rid of the problem.
Yeah, we had a baby boa in an apartment building one time too, but it was really tiny, and obviously it was somebody's that they let it out. But that was oh no, what do we do type scenario.
Yeah. Well, the second floor was the surprise. How it got up there through the pipes was interesting. So
yeah.
Before going on to, hey, we want to pivot to commercial, you mentioned you found a mentor, and a lot of our investors are in similar shoes. They're in their late 20s, whatever it may be. They're looking to get started and they're hungry. They don't know the next steps. So they're reaching out to people. Some of them are spending money on coaching programs. Some of them are, just reaching out to our guests, what's a little bit of advice that you would give to someone who is in that situation? How should you be approaching a mentor? What are some of the things you should be asking? What can you do to, show them that you are real?
Absolutely. So it's hard for me to put myself in those shoes now because, what was available 15 plus 7, years ago was not available than it is today, right? For people to access opportunities, let alone learning and education. The mentorship, I think overall collaboration is important, and it's a philosophy that we here at my company and in general go by. I think collaborating and learning from others in general is important. If you find someone that that's doing similar stuff, why not team up? Why not partner? Why go at it alone, right? I really think it's good to have some other heads in the room, other people with different opinions or experiences. Finding a mentor, it's a little bit more luck of the draw, right? Landing someone or finding someone. I just happened to, it just so happens my mom actually worked for him, back in college. And if you recall, there was an outfitter store, and she said, you should call this person. I used to hang out with him. I was friends with him all the time. And that's just what happened, right? It's just circumstance. And then he taught me the business, the old school method, right? The walking the streets, knocking on doors, picking the street. I'm a big, we're big in Wicker Park's Milwaukee Avenue. I used to walk up and down Milwaukee Avenue into the storefronts. Who owns this building? What's going on? And this is as a broker mentality, right? And he told me, he coached me to do all these things. And what that enabled me to do is to gain a skill set that, I normally wouldn't have had otherwise. So having that person, finding that person is the hard part. But once you have it, you got to lean into it.
A lot of that old school mentality, like did walk up and down. It's very, very prevalent in commercial still. The cold calling on the broker side is very prevalent. The cold calling, a lot of those things are very beneficial to the investor as well too. I think about Luke Blahnik and him walking up and down, and that's how he got the number the name and the number. He actually would walk up and down, and he saw the guy unlocking a door, and he got his ear, and whatever history went from there. But you're creating your opportunity when you're putting yourself out there on the streets and doing it now. People, a little more doors are locked these days, stuff like that, security wise.
Yeah,
but still, I mean, the opportunity is still there. I think to call it door knock or whatnot.
You got to pick the right spots for sure.
Yeah. The point is, no one else wants to do it, right?
Yes.
If you want it's an opportunity because 98% of the people listening are like, I ain't going to do that. Well, there you go. That's where.
Or they don't have time too, or maybe they would like to do it, but they don't have time, and maybe time is your competitive advantage in that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, that was before we had smartphones, and BlackBerries were just starting. So like all we had were our time and driving around and looking at buildings versus sitting behind the screen the whole time looking things up, right? So you had to get out there and make introductions and meet people that way. And it's funny, some people remembered me from when I was as they call me, a little kid, working the same neighborhoods for over a decade and a half, and they're still there, right? And I walked into their building or reached out to them or figured out a way to get in front of them, and they're still there. And at least hopefully they call me one day when they're time to sell something.
Well, I'm sure you experienced this too, but like I'm just putting this in kind of putting it out there compared to like residential brokerage. Commercial is very different. I actually literally last week did a whole seminar with our out here in Schaumburg about how commercial brokerage is different than residential. And for me, we do a lot of industrial around the O'Hare market. And I remember when I first got into it, I drive around, all I had really back then was LoopNet for the most part. Craigslist didn't even exist yet, but 2003, 2004. And people would not call you back on the signs even. So I said, man, I can make it in commercial real estate if I just call people back. So the whole mentality when you're trying to find some of these deals with some of these older school brokerage companies, they don't collaborate. They're not cooperative, and they're just to go hit the streets will as an investor will be very beneficial to be able to find these opportunities.
No, it's what you just said is very true. I actually took the skill set from learning the old school, methods, but adapted into the new school communication and those skill sets, right? And one of the biggest pet peeves is when someone doesn't call you back, right? And I after that I ended up over at @Properties, which everyone knows @Properties, and I started their commercial group from scratch. That's what I was focusing on. There was hundreds or 1,000 agents at the time that no one knew what to do with commercial, but I learned from that mentality in residential, right? You always be available, always call them back, be available 24/7, even though it's a little extreme sometimes. But I learned that responding to people and inquiries, and just, being courteous to when people reach out for questions or whatever it may be. It's important in our business.
Absolutely. So we go over to at properties. Let's talk about the investment side.
Sure.
The three flat, we get out from that. What happens next? Where do you focus your attention, and how does the journey continue?
Yeah, I fell into, before I got into purely commercial, I ended up doing a lot of tear downs in Lakeview, Lincoln Park. I found a niche there, meeting developers, and through that, I just started becoming more aware of the retail, the neighborhood streets and all the retail along the streets. And I ended up, a lot of these developers or owners would then say, hey, can you lease this storefront for me? Or, hey, I have this, a mixed use building or an office space to lease up. And that's, and I was a business finance person, and that's kind of the mentality I always had. So I always wanted to be making business decisions, versus the residential is more emotional than business typically. So that led me into dedicating my career into strictly commercial and investment sales, and a bunch of leasing early on too.
I agree. Go back and forth on drapes never appealed to me.
No, I couldn't handle people asking me about countertop colors, and it's just like, what am I doing?
Well, the one thing that I'm going to say this out loud, residential real estate brokers.
You say most things out loud, but continue.
I'm going to say it's like my thought out loud, because I think it's very important for anyone that's younger and getting into even residential real estate. As brokers, you are put in place to remove the emotion from the deal. And when an agent comes at you with all their full emotions, like, whoa, you're here to do exactly opposite of what you're actually doing right now. So if you're a new agent, your goal is to control the emotion, and whether residential or commercial, like that's what you're there to do, tame it. So that was my my brokerage tip of the week.
There we go. We had two for everyone.
Yeah.
So as you started to get involved with the commercial side of things, what are some of the, let's say someone's never had mixed use or done retail before. Give us just the 101 on comparing, hey, I have a Chicago, residential tenant versus a multifamily tenant. What are some of those nuances or, goods and bads?
So, obviously everyone knows apartments, it's pretty straightforward, but it's also higher turnover rates, right? It's, year to year leases, typically a lot more hot and cold calls, as they say, right? My toilet's broken, or my light bulb went out, or whatever it may be. Generally speaking, there are some exceptions to the rule with bad tenants in commercial, but generally speaking, you're being less bothered is an easy way of putting it, right? The commercial tenants are running a business most of the time. So they have some sophistication behind them. They have some ability to manage their own space. And one thing that's important to look at is, especially when you're either leasing up a space that you have, or you're brokering or whatever it may be, is the viability and the creditworthiness of that tenant, whether it's office or retail. That's very important. And, unfortunately, there's a lot of quote unquote bad tenants in terms of the credit perspective that are just mom and pop shops that don't have much savings behind them, but they want to open up a business. They want to get started. And those are the hard ones. Those are the harder decisions to make, because as an investor or advising a client who owns the building, you want to be fair to the tenant because they're trying to start something, right? Especially a smaller business. But at the same time, you're also trying to be a good advisor to the landlord or yourself if you're the investor itself, and make the right business decision on that tenant. So it's a lot of that going in, a lot of pieces of the business decisions in place there, versus just, here's an apartment, I'll give you new paint and carpet, or I'll clean this or that, and here's a new lease, right? It's a lot easier to lease those. You don't have to scrutinize the tenant as much versus the basic background checks or credit checks.
Yeah, the one thing I've always found to be an issue or trouble for smaller commercial landlords is their ability to do build outs or offer TI, tenant improvements, because if you might have a commercial building and your goal, it seems maybe when you're newer, your mindset is like, I want to get a Starbucks, or I want to get this type of tenant, I want to get some brand name or some national tenant. But when that national tenant comes in, they're looking for $30 a square foot for you to put up to improve their space, and they'll sign a 10-year deal. Now, most of those small guys that just barely scrape together the 25% to get a commercial deal doesn't have that type of downstroke. So that's why you see a lot of mom and pop buildings stay mom and pop buildings, and national brands continue to be national brands.
Yeah, and the only thing that changes over is when an investor who knows the national brand wants to be somewhere, they'll go after that building and try to just acquire it, right? With the knowledge that they're going to put in a new tenant.
Yeah, exactly. The management piece, I always say, it's for commercial. It's Monday through Friday, and there's no domestic violence.
Let's talk about build outs here. So what's usually, Danny, I know this is a very vague and open-ended question, but you buy a 7-unit building. It's got commercial on the bottom. No one's lived there for 2 years. You're trying to rent it out. How do you usually go about that? You usually look to get a tenant and then, hey, we pay X amount for the build out. Do you vanilla box it on the front end to try to make it more attractive? And both of you guys have more experience than I do. And I'm fumbling through one of these right now. So just curious to the thoughts there, because I think there was a lot of people in those boats where they wouldn't even know where to start, or what's even like fair pricing. How do you figure that out into the lease?
Yeah, so it's somewhat of a market driven or specific location driven question or answer sometimes, because if you have a space on a heavily trafficked corridor where there's normally retail, usually you can just put a sign up and wait for that tenant to come around, because the one thing you don't want to do is spend any money. If someone comes in and says, oh, I need to do this differently, and you just wasted 10 to 20 grand on doing certain things. However, on the flip side, I've been a part of some properties that are just complete wrecks, that a lot of tenants don't have the vision of what a space could look like. So you're almost better off going in as what we would call vanilla boxing, which is basically a core dark, or even a warm shell where you include like the HVAC and the heat, the heating of the space or plumbing. But sometimes you want to go as basic as possible, because every tenant has different needs, right? You don't know if you may land a simple tenant for a clothing store. What do they need? A bathroom? Do you need a small, hot water tank and a bathroom, and maybe you paint in a couple of new drywalls, right? But what if you get an elaborate, dentist, right? I've been a part of some dentists. That build out is very detailed, very high end, very expensive, and that goes into your last question, if they can afford it. But sometimes the tenants can pay for it themselves. But the key is, if you spend too much money up front, that ends up being a waste, and you got to take it out again. We don't see a point in doing that. It all depends on really where it's at and the condition of the space when you acquire it or when you have it.
How can you advise people to underwrite vacancy time for, someone's buying a 3 or 6 flat with the ground floor retail, and it's vacant now, or it's coming up vacant?
Yeah.
Like, give us feedback on your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So what we typically do, obviously, again, very street location specific, but in most cases, we're going to underwrite about 12 months of vacancy, right? And the reason why I say 12 months is, let's say you have the best location on the block and you have 5 people vying for it, right? So you're going to pick someone in the next 2 to 3 weeks. It's still going to take 30 to 60 days to get a lease done. I mean, unlike a contract or anything like that, which is why I got out of leasing, because there's no timetable, right? It's just a matter of trading paper and attorneys, et cetera, and legal language. So you're already 2 to 3 months in by the moment you even get an executed lease. And then there's usually some downtime, abatement period, as we call it, where you give them free rent to get in the space and start building it out. And then, to Tom's point, if you have to do build out, you need, as a landlord, may need to spend 2, 3, 4 months to actually get the infrastructure in place for the tenants. So at that point in time, no one's paying rent for a minimum 6 months just by adding those months together I already threw across. And then if you give free rent as an incentive on top of it, sometimes you're pushing 9 to 12 months. So it can go between 6 and 12 is a fair range to use. If you're in a lower demand location, I would use 12 months in most cases.
If you're looking at some of the main corridors in Chicago, whether it be Milwaukee, Elston, Clark, like what type of leases are these? It might be mom and pop businesses, but what type term? Like how long, I guess, are you seeing? And has that changed over the last 10 years at all due to supply and demand, or one way or the other?
It hasn't changed. The higher credit tenants are going to go for 10 years most of the time. We've seen a lot of 5 years versus with options more recently than not, only because people don't like to lock in that long-term as what they call long-term liability. If they want to move or they go out of business or they get acquired by someone else, I'm talking larger scale tenants, then they're on the hook, right, for that space for a long period of time. So 5 years is more common these days. The local mom and pops in the smaller, less traffic neighborhoods, I've seen, as is, take the space as is. It's just, you clean it up, you do the work, you put in whatever you want to put in, take it for a year, go year to year, right? I've seen as little as that. Obviously, the moment a landlord needs to spend any money on the space, you want at least 3 years, in my opinion, to recuperate some of that investment back that you make. Obviously, if that cost goes up higher, you want more years. So sometimes it's correlated based on what you got to put into the space.
I was talking to somebody the other day. They got a 3-year deal on a place over on Lincoln Avenue, but they're giving 6 months free rent. So they only technically signed a 2.5 years. So yeah. I guess advice might be that, if you want a 3-year lease, put the free rent on top of it. So maybe do a 42-month lease where they're actually paying for 36 months. So
correct. You do a 3.5-year lease instead. Like that's what you do. You get however, the main question is how long was it vacant before that? Right. Yeah. So,
you don't get greedy. You definitely don't get greedy. If
you're sitting there with a vacant space for 3 years, you'll take almost whatever you can get. Right. And you just say, okay, fine, take it. Let's go. I need to get something going here.
Those things get figured out often. You'll probably laugh at this, is based on the listing agent or the tenant agent wanting to make sure that they capture a little additional income, because the commission is usually based on the gross revenue.
It's percentage of gross.
Talk about lease term, because not lease term, the actual lease. So we all have the stock realtor board ones for residential. In suburbs too now, we have them even. So what are you recommending your clients? They have their attorney draft up these leases? There's nothing boilerplate out there you recommend? Give us your feedback on that.
There's some boilerplate leases I've seen that they're not down. You can't download them off the internet. I mean, I'm sure you can go to some of those Legal Zoom sites or whatever and find some. We always recommend using an attorney. Most investors have someone in tow, and if not, we always have some recommendations of smaller attorney shops that aren't going to be charging the highest price per hour, obviously. But the commercial retail leases in general are pretty straightforward. Obviously, the more complicated the property or the lease term in the space, it can get a little lengthy there. But generally speaking, we always recommend to lean on an attorney, because they're going to catch things that sometimes us brokers don't know. Even though I've seen so many leases, there's some little things and nuances to the legalese of certain situations that they may have a pulse on better than really anyone else. So we always recommend that in most cases.
Especially if the tenant comes in with an attorney too. You want to make sure it's attorney.
Yeah, because to be quite honest, residential tenants have, the eviction laws and and all that stuff with the city are a lot more tenant friendly. And same with retail and commercial. But the thing is, you don't see many lawsuits over an apartment tenant that's paying $1,500 a month, right? So, a tenant in 4,000 feet of retail space that's paying, $30, $150,000 a year in rent. That's where that legal stuff comes into play if there's ever an issue, right? Whether it's a bankruptcy or they default or they take off in the middle of the night. So you're better off having it done right up front, because in the event that happens, you're in a much better, well, I wouldn't say you're in a good position, but legally speaking, you're in a better position most likely.
Taxes, property taxes, as it relates, mixed use. Is there like a rule of thumb? Because your taxes are going to be higher with the mixed use, but not always. Your rent's not always higher as the apartment above. And some of these call it smaller shops. Any thoughts or information for the listeners on property taxes as it relates to mixed use type buildings?
Oh, great! Talk about taxes.
We're talking about saving them, not paying them. So we're trying to keep them a little light.
So here's one thing that a lot of people might not know: mixed use real estate, retail with apartments, is assessed at the same rate as apartment building, which is the 10% assessment, right? Pure commercial. So if you have a building that's pure retail and office and 100% with no dwelling units, et cetera, it's taxed at 25% assessment. So part of the advantage.
Real quick, Dan, for our listeners, so if you're assessed at $70,000, they're assuming a valuation of $700,000. That's the 10%.
That's correct.
And then 25%, obviously the same math, it's a higher assessed value.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that I've seen a lot of this is more anecdotal, right? And the city and the county has caught on to this over the years, but we had people back in the day, they would have a commercial building, 2 stories, 3 stories, whatever it may be, office and retail. They would change one of the units or add an apartment to get it classified as a mixed use, which is classified, if you look at the classification codes, the classification code of 2 is apartments and a mixed use. The classification code of 5 is commercial, whether it's retail, office, industrial. So when it's classified as a 2, you're at that lower rate assessment. Classification under 5 is at a higher assessment rate. So that's one thing to look at when you're looking up, on the assessor's site or looking up property locations. We've seen some properties that are misclassified. We have one in Wicker Park actually that we're trying to sell on Division Street, and it's got a restaurant and 3 apartments. Pretty straightforward. For some reason, it was reclassified as commercial, and we caught that, and we're like, you realize your taxes are probably, whatever the percentage higher than what they should be, but then it takes a year to reclassify it and for it to get onto the roster again. So those are one things to look at and how you can see the differences.
That's a big catch. That's
a good tip. Yeah.
That's never happened before. We wouldn't think to look for that. It's pretty obvious. It's a mixed use building with apartments and a retail space, but somehow it must have been lumped in with the next door. There's a condo building where there's a commercial condo. That's classified as a commercial space, even though above are residential condos. Retail condos by themselves or any office or commercial condo is going to be taxed at that commercial level, which is why a lot of people that own retail condos, it's another investment piece in Chicago. It's very, very, very popular around the neighborhoods where they get taxed at a higher level. So if you ever have any vacancy, you have a much higher tax bill to deal with no one paying the rent.
Yep. So one more thing on taxes. Do you see, housing providers going to the retail tenant and saying, hey, you're taking up 20% of the building, therefore in your lease, you're going to pay 20% of the tax bill? Like, do you ever see some sort of prorated assignment to that retail tenant?
Yeah, so there's different ways you can design it. We have people that do it based on the pro rata share of the income. Obviously, that's determined up front, right? So sometimes a retail tenant in a higher rent area is paying maybe half the income of the building, right? So the landlord will try to get them to pay half the taxes, for example. There's no rule to it. There's no right or wrong way. A tenant that's sophisticated and smart could come back to you and say, hey, I'm only taking 25% of the building. Why are you charging me 50%? Landlord could say, that's just what it is. Take it or leave it. Then a tenant will say, fine, I'll pay $2 less a foot in rent. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, a tenant's looking at their gross chunk rent, right? Whether it's the rent plus the taxes plus the other common area expenses that they get charged for, or any other utilities, et cetera. Tenants and businesses are usually looking at that total occupancy cost as a whole. So it's going to come out of the wash either way. But to what you just said, larger buildings typically use the pro rata of the physical space. Smaller buildings, landlords try to get away with charging more pro rata for the retail component.
Got it.
If that makes sense.
It does. And then what are some financing nuances that our listeners should be aware of going into mixed use compared to just just a standard multifamily apartment building?
So the number one thing is agency debt becomes more difficult if people are looking to get Fannie or Freddie, which is the most attractive of multifamily financing for acquiring new properties. If you have 5 or more units with a retail component, I forgot the exact breakdown of percentage of income that can't be commercial off the top of my head, but that you can still get agency debt on that mixed use. But generally speaking, mixed use, you cannot get the same traditional financing that you can with apartments, and the rates are usually higher. So there's a little bit disadvantage from that perspective. However, if you can jumble packages together, say you have 2 buildings near each other, next to each other, and you have 8 units and 2 retail spaces, you can lump them together in most cases and finance under an agency debt format.
Got it. Cool. Go ahead, Mark.
So you have this exposure to all these different, I was on your website earlier and you have tons of listings, right? You have a lot of brokers, you have tons of listings. you have access to different opportunities. And for us, most of our commercial deals we bought have been stuff we managed and maybe people retired or partners passed away. How have you been able to leverage brokerage operation to be a better investor?
Really is having a pulse in the market, right? And finding opportunities. Early on, I would say that don't think that you're going to get into brokerage and you're going to start finding these amazing deals right away, right? It's just not possible. It's really about your network, right? Over time, you start learning, more about deals through, word of mouth or people or, Mark, for example, if you're managing properties and someone that's, struggling with a property that maybe you're thinking of selling, you can easily talk to someone you're friends with, right? And be like, hey, they might be sellers. So leveraging the network that we have to find investment opportunities is important. There is a fine line between brokerage and looking at it for an investment, right? So in our business, we're very diligent on our clients we're selling their assets for them, and that's our job, right? We're not buying our own deals. We're not buying our own listings. Usually the deals we come across from an investment standpoint are completely off the grid or the radar of brokerage. So we're not having any conflicts of interest. Obviously, if that deal turns into a brokerage opportunity, that's when we flip the switch, right? And that's when we focus on the brokerage part of our business. So it's really about the network and expanding on that and talking to a lot of different vendors, whether it's in lending, banking, property management, and just kind of keeping your ear to the ground.
How are you guys utilize? A lot of people, brokers, so myself, I'm sure you guys have it, utilize CoStar. I hate them and they charge way too much. And that was the worst day when they combined with LoopNet. Like, I was so mad because I used to be able to at least have LoopNet and be able to yell at CoStar. But how have you guys utilized CoStar to, whether it be for marketing, or is there any tips you would suggest? Is there any point it'd be smart for general real estate investors looking for deals to invest in it based on the information they have in there?
So, we have we've had a historical love-hate relationship with all those services, right? Obviously we utilize it. We need, we use it, we need it. Everyone here has it. And on the flip side, we don't have MLS because we're not MLS brokers. And the same rule applies. If one of us wants it, then we all have to have it, but we don't sell 2 to 4 flats and we don't sell homes. So we don't really need it. It's kind of the reverse. I think it's important to have if you're doing what we're doing, right? You need to have your information out there so everyone's seeing it. Unfortunately, it costs a lot of money these days. There are other avenues. I don't know if you've heard of 𝗬𝘃𝗃𝗃 at all. 𝗬𝘃𝗃𝗃 is newer. They've been around. They still cost money to run on it, but it's much more user-friendly platform. And we do get a lot of leads from that as well. So between LoopNet, 𝗬𝘃𝗃𝗃, and CoStar, that's really all we typically use on a day-to-day basis. Our website, obviously, we try to promote because we have all of our properties up there as well. But it's kind of one of those things where if you're in the business, you almost have to conform and utilize these databases and the software. But I mean, it's robust. There's no question they've gotten better over the years. Early 10 years ago, we had a lot of arguments with them, with our account reps, because they just weren't providing the service that we're paying for. It's expensive. But over the years, they've gotten better.
As we're recording this, they called me and it popped on my phone. That's what caused me to ask, because they're always calling, but they just we take care of them and they take care of us. We made the relationship friendly, years ago, because we all need each other. Well, I think that's you got a very valuable point there, and you help them by giving them a whole bunch of data, right?
Correct.
And I think another thing that we do as brokers is we do that with appraisers too. So, listen, it's kind of the 80-20 rule when it comes to appraisers, I think. And they need information. And if you give them information when you have it and keep them on speed dial for when you're trying to price something out, either for your own investment or for
our brokers, answer the appraisers' calls, return those calls, because it could be a nuisance at some point, but they need to understand what's going on with the property and why it's sold for a certain reason. And if you have misinformation out there, it could make your next deal worse, right? If someone's looking at some deal you sold, or an appraiser put it in their report and it, they didn't really understand the nuances to it, but you didn't tell them, then it could look bad upon you. It could come back to bite you potentially.
Yeah, the appraiser should just be another person in your sphere of influence in your network. So I know a lot, and there's a leg up too. Is a lot of people shun them or they blow them off or they don't call back. And if you do, they'll be grateful. They're always grateful. Like, oh, thanks so much. When you got a phone with them.
Yeah, we like to share information with them because we want them to get it right. It's important.
I love that. That's a lot of tips here today.
So Danny, you guys have, been successful in multiple neighborhoods doing the commercial thing. Obviously, commercial's different than it was 2 or 3 years ago. So you talk a little about one, how that has changed in Chicago, and then two, are you still bullish, right? And then if so, where are you hunting? Where are you looking without giving away the secret sauce?
Yeah, breaking down by asset class wouldn't be bad feedback there as far as what you're seeing. I would love that as far as industrial versus retail and office.
Yeah, well, we all know, everyone that reads the news all know that apartments and industrial have been the golden childs of the past couple of years since COVID, right? During 2020, when the shutdown happened, I know the residential market went crazy, but everyone paused, right? Our world was effectively paused. Our deals that we had under contract were terminated. Everything went to a holding pattern, right? But the cool thing is, the good news is that everyone was working together in 2020 and 2021. Like the banks were providing forbearance and forgiveness to the landlords. The landlords were providing forgiveness to the tenants, and the tenants were, just figuring out how to, start paying rent again. And everyone was working together, and there was no real distress in the marketplace. And everything held up pretty well because 2021 values actually went up over 2019 values in our world, right? Interest rates, well, besides the government, the monetary policy giving up, a lot of free money out there and everything else that was money that was printed. Interest rates were so low that the purchasing power of the investment market was so strong that values were driven up dramatically, even over the 2019 levels before COVID hit. Obviously, we've seen a massive shift in the past 6 months. Since the volatility and this is our world, right? The treasuries and the markets and the bond markets, they correlate to what we do day and day, right? The 2 to 4 flats, the residential, it does, right? But, the problem is that a lot of our clients are investors placing capital, millions of dollars, right? So they're making very important decisions with their money. And in the past 6 months, the velocity of interest has gone down dramatically because no one knows where everything's headed and where everything is going to settle. What we try to tell our clients, whether they listen to us or not is a different story, is that, we kind of saw this coming, but at the same time, the rates aren't going down, right? They're going to keep going up before they go down. So if you have an investment thesis, if you look at this area, this location, this tenant, these buildings, trying to time the market is never a good thing, right? We're all, everyone's trying to be a day trader in real estate, but that's just not possible. You can't time it perfectly. If you have conviction and you have a thesis and you want to buy something and the cash flow works, that's what's important. And right now, the market's still strong in general. Fundamentals are still strong. The debt market is what's causing the slowdown in our world right now.
Got it. Do you see retail changing dramatically? Right? Like, is it going to be harder for them to survive? COVID kind of put them on their butt a little bit. Is there going to be a recovery there? Or do you feel like, hey, we now have to adjust and expect a higher cap rate? Yeah.
Retail's fine, actually. Retail was going through a reckoning before COVID even happened. So there was already the big box stores were failing, the malls, et cetera. So they were already, ahead of the curve on trying to figure out where retail goes. And retail has bounced back really strong across the board. And, it's coming out of COVID where no one did anything, right? Everyone came back and was ready to go out again and go shopping, et cetera. We don't see any real, any bad outlook on retail in the near term. Obviously, like I said, cap rates, as we follow closely, are usually volatile based on where the debt markets land, and they move up and down here and there. But retail's going to be fine, and I think everyone read all the bad news about retail during COVID, but it was already happening before that, and people were reinventing it already.
Got it.
What about Chicago as a whole?
I love Chicago. I think Chicago, I cannot understand why when people call us from out of state, and what I mean, over 70% of our transactions last year were from out of state investors. Okay. The main reason over historically why they come to Chicago is because we are quote unquote cheaper than the coastal markets and the more Sunbelt or more trendy markets, right? Like, when you look at cap rates and yields, Chicago historically has been higher, which is a better return for most investors than they are in the New Yorks, the Miamis, the Californias. And when people call and they read, it's all about the bad press in the news, I get frustrated and I try to ask them, I was like, where else can you find a 200-plus-year-old global city with infrastructure in place that has been here for over a century, go down the line of why job markets, Big Ten schools and all the employment, corporate headquarters. I have no issues with Chicago. If it wasn't for our politics and our taxes, I think, everyone would have a much stronger appeal to coming, investing here and be more expensive, in my opinion. But I think Chicago is going to be fine. I think you're going to see the issues downtown with the office buildings. They're going to be reinvented. I know they're coming out with incentives to convert them to multifamily or whatever may happen. The Google announcing to go downtown is going to hopefully, revitalize that pocket down in the CBD in the Loop. It's all cyclical. The high rent streets like the Michigan Avenues of the world and State Streets, those are the anomalies, right? Those are small microcosms of our city, right? That's not the overall picture. Like the neighborhood streets are full. I don't know the last time you guys traversed some of the neighborhoods that are heavy retail. They're full. The storefronts are full. There's not like a paper on every window saying vacancy or for lease. It's active, and people are out and about, and those are moving along just as they always have been.
Yeah, I rode Milwaukee all the way out to the edge of the city last week, and man, I was impressed by exactly what you said. Like, not only is it full, but then they're actually adding more. There's a lot more build outs going on and so forth that I saw. So I was very impressed by just the Milwaukee corridor.
Yeah, I think the days of big, sexy, high rent, that type of space might have that's not coming back, right? I mean, I'm sure some of it will to some extent, but all the neighborhood streets and all the neighborhood pockets that we all traverse on a day-to-day basis, those are always, those are really the pulse of the city, right? That's the heartbeat of the city, the way I see it, right? You go to every little neighborhood, they all have their commercial corridors, and that's where the action's at, and they're never going to go away. I don't know how you can think of a situation where they would go away.
Agree. Love it. All right. Before we wrap, what's your 5-10 year outlook? You got a huge brokerage operation. You're doing some investments. Like you do brokerage in multi-states. Where's your 5-year, 10-year plan taking you?
We're in growth mode. We all came from different companies over the years, and we found a nice little niche in our mixed urban mixed use, other investment properties, industrial, retail, office, and what we like to focus on in general is the $2 to $25 million range of investment properties. And we're seeing an opportunity to grow our team. We actually are adding some people in Wisconsin right now because the way we see it, it's an extension of Chicago into Milwaukee in that area. And, the way I see it is we can only get bigger for what we're doing. And I think everything's going to be I think Chicago's going to come back stronger than people will give it credit for, right? I think there's going to be a lot of investment here in the near term. I just think people got to get through this cycle of bad news, bad press over the past couple of years. Myself personally, I'm going to continue what I do. I'm going to invest opportunistically as I see opportunities come across my desk. Hopefully, as I get older and continue to get wiser, I'll be able to make better deals right over time. And it took me a long time to finally get to a point where I know what a good deal is. And it just takes a while. I missed some great opportunities back coming out of the Great Recession. I wish I had money back then, right? And I saw the stuff come through. I was like, whoa, I wish I could buy that for that cheap, right? And I'm sure a lot of people said the same thing. But that's you can't expect to be, everyone can't expect to be an amazing investor in the first couple of years in the business.
What's a good deal look like to you today?
I have a philosophy, and this is just my personal philosophy. If I can find a way to double my equity in an investment, time horizon to be determined, right? I'm as long as I like the property location and I see that there's a path to double my money, whether it's 5 years from now, 1 to 5 years, et cetera, that's where I focus. That's where I start. If I don't see that path, maybe it's not for me. Now, maybe in 20 years, some people become more passive and will look at different opportunities in a different light. But personally, that's the way I look at opportunities that I see now. And we're doing stuff across the spectrum in different asset classes. It's just opportunistic.
That's good. Just to be clear, Danny, for our listeners who are hearing that, that's not the property doubling in value. That's you. If you got to put 150K into this thing, there's a path to the net worth has changed to 300K in some sort of horizon, some sort of time horizon.
Correct. Like, unlike my first 3 flat in Bridgeport I bought at the peak of the market, we thought, wow, everything just appreciates. If you just go, and in 3 years, it's going to appreciate another 20, 30%, and we'll sell it for, $500,000, and we all doubled our money, and that'd be great. Well, I would tell people from that experience and just in general, banking on an appreciation thesis isn't going to get you there, right? Obviously, you can get lucky on timing, et cetera, but we were buying into that, and that was our thought. We were young and naive. It didn't pan out. We lost money. We lost some of it. But going forward, as you just said, Tom, if you put in, if the property's $1 million, right, and you get debt for $700,000 of debt, and you put in $300,000, as long as you can see where you can sell it one day, pay off the debt, and you get back $600,000, right? As just a general rounding, round example. That's the way I look at it.
Yep, absolutely. It's so simple too, because you get not that you're banking on appreciation, but you're getting 100% appreciation on that million, even though you only put in 30% of that million. Right. And that's how that net worth can just spiral. It's so good.
And they say you make money on the buy, right? So if you find the right opportunity where there's a value add component, right, and you put some money into it and you make the right purchase, you're going to see that, right? The market may have not changed dramatically, but you changed the property to make it more valuable.
Yep. That leverage is the main difference between the stock market and real estate right there. What you guys are talking about. And there was that, I know you'll agree with me, is that 2005, 6, 7, there was that fear of missing out. Yeah. Like, you had to buy today because you're gonna lose that much equity by waiting another couple months, or that much appreciation. Like, there was this crazy like fear of missing out that was going around, at least my network, and it seems like everywhere around the country is kind of why everyone was like all in.
and right now it's the opposite. Everyone's thinking that they're gonna see lower prices, so they're waiting for prices to keep going down, and we just haven't seen that yet. Yeah,
and it won't, because everyone's expecting it. No one was expecting what happened in 2008.
We've been preaching this even during COVID. The amount of capital that has been built up over the past decade, because everyone, quote unquote, missed their amazing opportunity in the Great Recession because no one was prepared for it. Everyone's prepared this time. So when you find that, distressed situation, guess what? I'm sure 10 other people found it too, and you're going to get bid right back up. So that's why I go back to that network, and knowing word of mouth and having the right connections helps a lot.
Good stuff.
All right, cool.
Mark, let's wrap this.
Let's wrap. Here's your rapid fire questions. You ready?
Yep.
All right. So what is your competitive advantage? How have you been able to do this while so many others wish they could?
In terms of our brokerage, our competitive advantage is our database. We have a national database that is over 50,000. And it continues to grow. So we're able to access private capital from all over the country that we know a lot of other people cannot access to. Like I said, the statistic before, over 70% of our buyers last year specifically were from out of state.
What is one piece of advice you would tell someone that is yet to buy their first property here in Chicago?
Don't buy it alone. Find a partner.
I like that one.
I love it. I love partners. What do you do for fun?
I take care of my 3 kids, shuffling them around all day long. But if I had my choice, I'd be playing basketball or golfing.
There you go. Similar life to me here, Danny. What's a good book, podcast, or self-development activity that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Self-development. If you can find time and carve out some time to meditate, I think it's really good to clear your headspace. Whether you do it once a week or once a month, once you start doing it, you'll see the benefits of it, in my opinion.
Besides yourself, name one person in your local network you'd highly recommend to other investors as a quality resource.
I would recommend our publicist, 𝗬𝘃𝗲𝗏𝗵𝘁. She has really elevated our game in terms of getting us in front of folks like yourself and other networking events and other sponsorships. At least if you're looking to promote your business, she's been, really a found treasure for us.
Yeah, she's a friendly to the podcast over here, so we always appreciate it. So, Danny, thank you so much. You provide a ton of value to our listeners. How can they learn more about you? Is there any way they can provide value to you?
Feel free to go to our website, www.greenstone-partners.com. You can learn really everything about us. We have all our information up there, contact information, and our profiles and our properties. If you need any advice or any way to look at a deal and size it up and help you with some, advice, feel free to reach out. Our value you provide to us is by connecting with us. I think the more people we know, I think the better it is for us as a whole to know more about the investors out there in our market.
All right. Mark, are you ready for the Chicago Fact?
I am. And Chicago Fact brought to you by Renovo. Today, our potential recipient is 𝗵𝗁𝗵𝗁 out of Wicker Park, coincidentally. So,
all right. And by the way, if anyone wants to come up with some Chicago facts or just knows some, please just DM us. These are getting 200 episodes in. It's a lovely city, but it's hard to find ones where Mark still has a chance to answer without getting like super granular. So finding generic questions that are doable is tough. All right.
Are you saying that I'm so good at Chicago facts that you're having a hard time stumping me? Is that what?
No, I'm saying I either got to go like real deep, which makes it too hard for you and no one ever wins. So like we need to find more high level general ones, but we've done like 100 of them.
Gotcha.
So here's an example. So in what census did Chicago have its highest population? So where were we at our peak population wise? And it's the census. So it would be rounding up, basically the decade leading up to it. The 1930 census, 1950, 1970, 1990.
Oh man, I want to say 1950. After the war, people came back. The suburbs weren't built yet. People are living 60% in major cities at the time in the country. I'm going with 1950, but 1970 would be my thing that would hold me back.
We don't get 2 answers. There's only 4 options.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying it. Just
right.
When it is 1970, I just want to make sure people know that would be my second thought.
Danny, where are you going with?
1990.
1990. The answer is 1950. Mark, you got
Bam!
it. The bungalow belt was hopping.
Was the answer total population or just total population?
Metro
Chicago total population. We're at 3.6 million in 1950.
Well, think about it this way, and this is how I thought about it. Think about our housing stock. Majority, I think it's I forgot what it was, like 65 or 80% of our housing stock was built before 1960. So people coming back from the war. I mean, the suburbs weren't even built for another 10 years at that point. So you had all these people. That's kind of how I broke that down. I didn't.
No, and it's dense.
Yeah, it was just dense.
I grew up in 𝗏𝗁𝗃. It's your house on part of the grid. Your house after house, and that was post-war construction.
Yeah. So that's awesome. All right, cool. All right. The day always goes that much better when I get the fact right. So I feel good. 𝗵𝗁𝗵𝗁𝗁. We're going to send you out a $50 gift card for sponsored by Renovo. Thank you very much. You went on there and bought a t-shirt. So we appreciate you supporting and wearing the Straight Up Chicago Investor gear. So, and as far as you guys, it's time to say goodbye. Thank you very much, Danny, for coming on here. It was a great show. I'm sure there's some other angles we can maybe have you back on in the future. Tom, thank you as always. Listeners, please visit wherever you're getting this podcast from and leave us a review. And then at that point, take that little forward button and send it to somebody that you think would appreciate this episode. Even if it's a listener that you think is already listening, send it to them and put it in their inbox. So thank you again, Danny. Thank you again, Tom. And listeners, we'll see you next week.
Thanks all.
Thank you, guys.